Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, former immigration lawyer turned entrepreneur, the co-founder and CEO of Laborless, an immigration tech company that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency for the immigration and mobility industry, and of course, which brings you this show. We took a little break for some travels from the show, and I'm really excited to be back with a lot of amazing episodes. So today we have a really awesome guest. This is somebody who is building a really awesome startup, and also somebody who I have had the chance to hang out with outside of work stuff and play tennis with together. So I'm really excited to have our guest today on the show. So our guest today is Awais Hussain, who is the CEO and founder of a company called O1Pathways. So O1Pathways is an AI powered platform that helps people file for their O1 visa. It started off with, being kind of like a really smart assessment tool, I guess, if you will. You put in your information, credentials, et cetera, and it would tell you whether or not you may be eligible for an O1 visa. And now the company is expanding and they're providing more than just assessment. They're helping folks with the actual, putting together things for the application. So really excited for this episode and to hear Awais's journey as an immigrant into the US and all the stuff he's worked on, and of course the company that he's built today. Before we get started with the episode, I do want to say big thank you to the main sponsor of this episode, DocketWise. So if you're in the immigration space in the US, you've probably heard of DocketWise, but in case you haven't, DocketWise is an all-in-one immigration case management platform with best-in-class forms, really customizable questionnaires, industry-leading integrations, including with my tech company, Laborless, and great customer service. They have a really awesome team who I've known for a number of years. And I always say this, but one of the things I really like about DocketWise is not just the product that they built, but kind of what they give back to the industry. They have a podcast now. They have a really great blog. They have ebooks. They put on events and webinars. They do so much for the immigration industry. They support this show. So I'm really grateful to them. So if you are an immigration law firm employee, a lawyer, paralegal, et cetera, and you are either looking for a case management system, forms management system, or maybe you're just interested in exploring, check out DocketWise. Their website is docketwise.com, or check out the link in the show notes. So without further ado, Awais, thank you so much for being here. And I am super excited to have this conversation.
Great. Me too. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. What I love about your story, and I've had a few guests on the show who kind of went through the immigration process on their own, and it's like that I don't want to say traditional entrepreneurial thought, but that idea of like you going through something and then thinking there's got to be a better way to do this, right? And then some people just maybe complain or make a comment. Other people say, I want to work on this problem. So I'm excited to get to that. But first, I like to get into the background story of the guest. So just a little bit about you. You live in the U.S. now. I know you were born in the U.K. Your family, though, immigrated to the UK from Pakistan. So, just briefly, what do you remember about growing up in the UK, immigrant home? Were you kind of encouraged to always go to school? Were you encouraged to be in business? What were some of those dynamics, if you remember?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. I guess like growing up, I just like loved learning how systems work, whether that's like a car engine or a refrigerator or air conditioner, just how do things work, and asking those. Like I was always the kid who was asking those big questions of like, why does it rain? Like why do clouds float? Like all that stuff. And so I don't know, my experience was like in an immigrant community, like lots of Pakistani people around, South Asians, people from Africa. Like I think my primary school in the UK had like more, like it was very diverse, I would say. And then I like loved school, loved learning, just like got good grades. And then that was what eventually led to like going to Harvard for undergrad, which was like an amazing experience. And I feel like maybe a turning point in my life where I went from seeing what life was like in the UK and London to just seeing how big the world could be, basically.
Did anybody in your family ever like run a business, or were people kind of career, professionals? Like what was that like for you in terms of the makeup of the folks you saw around your life and their careers?
Yeah, I would say we weren't like super entrepreneurial. Like it was kind of a standard working class family.
Mhm,
Like my dad was an electrical technician, so he spent a lot of time fixing radios and
mhm.
working at like an import company. So like when I was growing up, I always had tons of like magnets and tiny
So
screwdrivers
cool.
and things like
Oh my
that
God.
around, like playing with electronics. And then my mom was a stay-at-home mom. Um,
That is when you if you're a kid and you have magnets and screwdrivers and electronics, that is heaven. I mean, forget
mhm,
about the toy store. I don't care who you are. Playing with that stuff is great. Yeah, I'm trying to, I try to remember, especially when I ask these questions. I loved taking things apart, some electronics. My uncle, he had a computer store in like, I mean, this was the early 90s, mid 90s, I guess, in Israel. And like, this was when, I mean, in the US, that's when some of these big computer stores were popping up. But around the world, I mean, there was no, we had a store called Comp USA and a few other big stores where you can come in and there's all the big standing computers with, their motherboards and all the stuff and the monitors. I mean, nothing like the Apple store of today. And he had a tiny little version of it. And so when I would go there for summers to spend time with my grandparents and my family, I would work in his store. I was probably like, I mean, I don't want to say work. Okay. I wasn't legally
mhm.
working. I was like 10, but I was helping. I was screwing things on. And I loved that so much. And so I think we think a lot about toys and games for kids, but man, give kids like a wrench, a screwdriver, a couple of pieces of plywood, just let them kind of mess around. And I think that's so much fun. And it leads kids to actually be curious and be willing to like learn by doing and take things apart. So I love that. You just reminded me of that memory saying screwdrivers and the magnets. So so you studied, did you always know that you want to go to university outside of the UK? Like, did you want to go
No,
to Harvard or whatever? How did that idea sort of come about?
definitely not. It was a very kind of random thought, I would say. So I knew I wanted to go to a good university, or like that was kind of drilled into me of just like, you know, aim as high as you possibly can, like give it your best. And so I like had already been accepted to Oxford, and like that would have been my default plan. And
Mhm,
then I like randomly applied to a few US universities just on a whim. I was like, I have nothing to lose by applying. The worst they can say is no.
mhm,
And I like fully did not expect to be admitted. I was like, there's almost no chance I'll be accepted. But yeah, sent off an application. I woke up at 4 a.m. to go take a train to like one of the few SAT centers in the UK that would allow me to take a test, and then sat the like 4 hour SAT test. And yeah, somehow got accepted. And then like it was very exciting from then on.
So when you got
Yeah.
accepted, was your family excited, or were they kind of nervous to, because now their little boy is moving, abroad? I mean, that's a big deal versus going to school close by.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, at that time, I feel like I didn't really appreciate the difference. I was kind of like in my mind, I was like, wow, how could you possibly say no to like
Mhm,
such an amazing opportunity? And then I like came to the US for the like Visitas Admit weekend where they just like show you around, and I got to see like the 60,000 seater football stadium and like the amazing facilities and like meet some of the professors. And it just seemed like such a good opportunity, and I felt incredibly grateful to yeah, like have access to that. I don't know, maybe my parents in their minds were thinking like, oh, this is a big risk.
mhm.
But they, yeah, ultimately were very supportive. And yeah, it just felt like such a great opportunity.
That's awesome. Yeah,
um,
that's really great. Because otherwise, you might go and say, okay, well, I'm so far from home, et cetera. And this way, you can go and just really be immersed in the experience.
mhm,
So, okay, so you graduated high school, you applied, you got into Harvard, you said, okay, this is where I'm going to go. Obviously, large university, they have their internal kind of student and scholar services department. What was that experience like for you, though? Because this was kind of your first immigration experience, or your main one.
mhm.
What was that like? Do you remember anything about it? Was it stressful, or do you feel like it was handled well by the university? You provided them with information and docs, and they said, "Okay, great. Here's your F1 visa."
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely handled well by the university. I didn't have the smoothest experience. So what ended up happening actually was I applied for my F1 visa. I like finished my high school exams kind of end of May, June time. And then I went for my appointment at the US Embassy in London. And I actually remember this very vividly because on the same day, there was another student who was also going to Harvard, also in my class, and he went up, got his passport. They were like, we'll give you your visa in a week. Great. When I went up, they actually told me that my application was going to administrative processing, which I think the immigration lawyers in the audience will know, but it just means there is a undefined amount of time that they will need to run background checks on you and figure out whether to give you this visa. Like it's not a denial, but it's also like, we just need more time. And so that was incredibly stressful because I didn't know when it would be approved. And what ended up happening was the term started at the end of August or early September, and the visa wasn't approved until October. And so I actually had to skip a year. So I got into Harvard, was very excited, like raring to go. And then effectively had to take like a forced gap year or an unplanned gap year and start a year later than I expected. So I think I became like mildly famous within the Harvard class I was in because I had met like a ton of people at visiting weekend, but then couldn't join them in that class.
Wow.
And yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that was like my first encounter with like, okay, like US immigration can be this like big bureaucratic opaque system. Because like at that summer, I like tried to do everything I could to get this visa expedited. Like I contacted like law professors at Harvard Law and, like tried to get it expedited, but there just wasn't anything to be done. So, I mean, it worked out okay. Like I ended up taking the gap year. I like got a programming internship and like learned how to code and like went traveling a bunch. And I think I had a great experience. So it wasn't terrible, but it was just interesting that like as a 17 or 18-year-old, there is this like external large force that can have such a big impact on my life. It was like my first encounter with something like that.
And it's something you think like, guys, I was admitted to Harvard. I'm ready to go. Don't you want me to be there? Why are you making this so difficult? It almost seems illogical, but did you end up, I mean, you didn't end up studying with those students that you met your first year, right? Because by the time you entered, they're now in their second year and you're starting as a freshman. Was that right?
Yeah, I think I still had some friends who I had like kept in touch with, but I was in like a different class. So
yeah. Wow, that's really cool. By the way, how did the fame turn out? Did you show up and they're like, "Oh, you're the guy"?
Yeah, no, I mean, I got lots of really nice messages from people and people just saying like, "Oh, that sucks. Like we're gonna miss you." I don't know. Yeah, this was the era when like pre-college everyone was on Facebook, like various Facebook groups chatting to each other. So, but it was okay. Like I'm still really grateful that I got to spend 4 years at Harvard and got to spend that time in the US. And I feel like that has shaped my kind of career trajectory since. Like, I think if I had not come to study in the US, then I would have had no idea of like how powerful technology can be. And like even on the East Coast, I feel like that Silicon Valley mindset was very prevalent. And I know you asked a bit about what Harvard was like, and I think just it was like the most ambitious, like competent, skilled, like passionate people I had been around. Just like everyone was really driven, and yeah, it definitely like raised my standards and expectations for what like I believed I myself was capable of.
That's awesome. Did you know that you wanted to study computer science or engineering? Because when you took that gap year, it sounds like you actually pursued that skill. So is that something that you were doing? Is that something you were planning on doing at Harvard if you had come on time?
No, I actually didn't even study computer science at Harvard. So I studied physics and philosophy.
Right.
So I was, again, kind of coming back to this like love of learning and like understanding how systems work. I was like super into physics, loved the kind of deep questions that come up in philosophy. And so I studied those two things and then just kind of taught myself to code on the side and just went to like hackathons and joined Hack Harvard and like did a bunch of extracurriculars that were coding related. But it wasn't part of my like formal degree.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the fact that you were able to, get good enough to actually put some things together. I know, briefly, I guess you did have some sort of entrepreneurial endeavor. You started, was it a school project at Harvard where you started this like tech company? I mean, you might say it's not a big deal, but it's on your LinkedIn profile. And I saw the screenshots in the App Store, which is really cool.
Nice.
So like, what was that? Was that through a class? Was that just, self-initiated?
Yeah, that was cool. That was like, so like startups were definitely in the air. Like I think at Harvard, it was like lots of people wanted to be entrepreneurs. And so me and a friend got together and we wanted to build this like time tracking app. It was like iOS 8 or something, or I don't know, like one of the early iOSs.
Mhm.
And we built and shipped this like time tracking app, got it on the App Store. We were part of the Harvard iLab program. So it was like a summer where they give you like a space to work. And then we like lived really close by and just spent a summer like building this app. Yeah, got it out. It was a really fun experience. It gave me like my first insight into what building a startup looks like and the work involved.
Was it?
Yeah.
Was there any expectation for it to become a business, or was it kind of like, let's just get the experience and have fun?
Yeah, I think it was like, let's try and see what happens.
Yeah.
But then what ended up happening is like I think we did a great job on the coding, but then by the time we got to like distribution, marketing, like trying to spread it out, like classes had started again. And so we didn't really have the time to like really invest in it.
Yeah.
But it was still a great experience.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. Um, cool. So you, by the way, we actually have a couple comments I just want to
Oh,
bring
nice.
up. We have Saeed saying, let's go, bro.
Oh,
Always.
nice. Hello. Saeed is a friend
So,
of mine from secondary school.
oh,
Very
nice.
nice
That's
to see him.
awesome. Thanks, Saeed. Appreciate your comment. Marianne says, how disappointed, but way to go. Disappointing about the portion where you were denied, or I guess your visa was held up. But way to go to be mildly famous. And then she says USCIS is hurry up and wait. So,
Mhm.
Marianne, thank you for your comments. Dr. Koluri says, thanks for Roman, spasiba, which is thank you in Russian. So appreciate the comments, guys. If you have questions while we're chatting for Awais, especially once we start talking about O1 pathways, please do drop them in the comments. One of the reasons I love doing this live is to actually interact with folks who are watching. So thanks for that. So okay, you did this, you had this little kind of the project that you worked on, you graduated with a degree or degrees in physics and philosophy. Obviously, the 4 years at Harvard sounded great, and you were coding on the side. So one would think you graduate, you're going to get a great job at Meta or Square or Tesla or any one of these, like Google, any one of these companies, but you did something totally different.
Mhm.
You traveled for a whole year. You took basically kind of a gap year, but I guess it was structured through a Harvard program.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that is a really cool experience, and I guess something that shaped you at least to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting time to reflect on because, yeah, like end of junior and then into senior year, like that's when recruiting is happening. So, like, it's like McKinsey is showing up on campus and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and all these big companies that like are actively trying to recruit new grads. But I don't know, I kind of looked around and I just felt like, okay, it feels as though I am going to get like funneled from like one kind of elite environment where like everyone is incredibly smart and capable and competent into like another elite environment where it's just going to be not quite a status game, but like I felt like there was more of the world that I still needed to see. Like I was very worried about like being shaped into this like very narrow person who could only see what life was like for the very like privileged or well off. And so like Harvard had this thing where you could get like a travel fellowship where they would essentially like fund you to travel and like explore some part of the world. So I picked India. I wanted to see just like what does it look like in the rest of the world when you're not in these like kind of hallowed halls. And so I like wrote a proposal. I wanted to just like yes, almost like study and like explore India and see what was happening basically.
What was your proposal? I mean, what was the pitch, I guess?
The pitch it was like a 2-page essay that I spent like 4 months like refining and
Wow.
perfecting. But it was basically about like I wanted to go deeper into like meditation and yoga and like understand some of the more like spiritual aspects of what like yeah like Indian spirituality, and then also just like it was such a diverse place that I wanted to see like okay um, yeah, like who can I meet and what will happen? And also I wanted to have a bit more spontaneity. So I wanted to like Harvard had been incredibly structured. Like
Mhm.
it's basically when the semester starts, you pick 4 or 5 classes, you get given a syllabus, and like every class has a syllabus and says, like April 17th, this paper will be due. And effectively that means that your whole semester is like pre-structured before you've even started. So you know exactly what you're going to be doing on every day for the semester. And I wanted to live like, okay, what happens when I don't have that structure in place? Like, what kind of person am I? So I kind of went to India. I had planned like the first 2 or 3 weeks, but I hadn't really planned beyond that. And I had also read this book called Vagabonding. The subtitle is like The Art of Long-Term Travel. And that just got me hyped. I was like curious to be like, okay, what does it look like to travel in a place where you're not just a tourist, but you are actually spending enough time to like get to know people and learn stuff. Yeah. And I actually wrote a bunch of like I wrote about it a lot. So I have this like book which I'll show, which I self-published. It's called Travels in India. It's available on Amazon if anyone wants to read more about the India experience.
I will. I should have shared. I should have put that in the show notes. So I'll update the show notes with the link to that. Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. I went to India for the first time last year, and I went again this year, and so happy that I did. You're preaching to the choir here about wanting to explore sort of an unstructured life, and actually, it's a challenge because we need structure, right? I mean, you need to know what you're doing that day. When you're getting up, especially if you have any responsibilities whatsoever. But in a place like university, that structure is just handed to you. And I guess it is a challenge to say, okay, how competent can I be on a daily basis when nobody's giving me any structure? And I happen to be in a place where structure isn't even really, around. I mean, it's pretty, I don't know where you were in India, but even I was only in a couple of cities and it's, it's pretty chaotic. I mean, it can feel unstructured just being out and about. So that's really beautiful. What did you? I mean, obviously, I'll read the book, but not to ask you to really talk through the whole book. But what are a couple of things that really stood out for you in terms of, what you got out of it, especially juxtaposing it with what you're saying your experience was at Harvard?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely very spontaneous. So just for reference, like the way I was living is I had like I think 100 items that could all fit into this like 55-liter backpack. And I had like packed it so many times that I could, pack it in 10 minutes and be at the next place. So I was very kind of untethered to any specific location. And that was nice because I could like meet someone, and if they invite me to like come visit their like family village or something, I could just do that next week. Like I didn't have a prior commitment that I had to uphold. So like one of the first things I did is I participated in this program called the Jagriti Yatra, which was you basically live on a train for 2 weeks with like 500 other, mostly like Indian like young people who are also like ambitious and trying to like make something happen in India.
Wow.
So that was amazing. Like we got to see, like Aravind Eye Care is a hospital that does cataract surgeries like way more efficiently and way more cheaply than anywhere else on the planet. We got to see like charities that had been giving like food and clothing to people in India who needed it at like a huge scale, like solar panel facilities in rural villages. Like it was just amazing to see. Like there was so much energy in India. I think like I got the sense, at least from the people I met, that everyone was aware that there's like a lot of work to be done, and also that like we are going to be the ones to do it. Whereas I feel like in the UK and sometimes in the US, there is this idea of like stagnation where it feels like, oh, we've already done all all the bridges are built, like all the dams are built. Like there isn't, like sometimes you can meet people who feel as though all the big work has been done. Whereas in India, it's like, like there are still hundreds of millions of people who need like access to toilets and access to electricity. And yeah, I just felt like there was a great amount of energy, especially among young people, to like contribute to like the country.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that they're working on effectively the basic necessities. I mean, the infrastructure, and so the energy also comes from just the need for that to exist. But I think it's really cool, for us, let's say, who don't live there full time. I mean, sure, you could have decided to move, but to go there, take that energy, store it somewhere inside of you, and then return to your life and somehow use that energy towards whatever you're building here. And I think that creates so much passion around moving a company or project forward that maybe arguably is not as fundamental as like running clean water, but let's say in the particular context of immigration law, if it's a great product, it can help people tremendously, right, who are going through a really stressful period of time. So It's really cool that you got that experience and then you were able to like take that positive thing out of it. We had a bunch of comments, so I just wanted to kind of run through them quickly. Marianne says structure can be both a blessing and a curse, and says if you haven't read Pico Iyer's work, you definitely should. Video Night in Kathmandu is a great read. Dr. Kalari says O1 visa, interesting topic. So yes, we will definitely get to that. And apparently has some TED Talks. So your friend Saeed says that backpacking reminds me of the D of E days. Great to see your progress, though, brother. What is D of E? I don't know if you know, Awais.
Yeah, D of E is the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which like teenagers in the UK do. It's basically like backpacking or hiking through like forests and mountains. And you have to like learn a bunch of skills, like how to put up a tent and how to read maps. And yeah, that was a lot of fun. I did that as a teenager with like a group of friends, and we just like went camping for a few days.
That kind of almost sounds like Boy Scouts a little bit.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I wish I did that. We don't have that here in Queens, New York. We take the subway. Those are our adventures on a daily basis. Cool. Okay, so you graduated Harvard. You did this incredible trip. You came back, or did you come back to the U.S.? Because now at this point, you've graduated. I know you have your F1, and there's obviously OPT, optional practical training for folks who don't know, where you can work on that visa for X amount of years. What was your next step after you finished your India trip?
Yeah, so I didn't make use of OPT. After India, I like worked in London for a bit, and then I got the opportunity to work at Wave, which was building financial infrastructure in Africa. So it's kind of interesting. Like I think I probably wouldn't have taken the job at Wave if I hadn't had the India experience, because Wave was basically you have to spend a lot of time in Senegal, in Dakar, essentially trying to get like a new banking system off the ground, which was like an incredibly ambitious project. But you're going to have to deal with like mosquitoes, and like your shower stops working, and like there's dust everywhere, and you're not going to have the kind of luxuries that someone living in a high rise in New York might expect.
Right.
But I think because I had been through the India experience and had been basically like backpacking around the country, I like knew I could handle it and was excited about the adventure of building in Africa.
So tell me a little bit about kind of what the role was, and what you ended up doing at the company, because it's By the way, just as a side note, a lot of people think the American financial system is actually quite outdated. I mean, we were, as far as I know, one of the first countries, if not the first, to have electronic funds transfer, right? So where I could send money from my bank to yours electronically rather than taking money out of. But that infrastructure, again, correct me if I'm wrong, because you know this better than I do, but that infrastructure still exists, which is part of the reason why it takes so long for like money to clear from my bank to yours. And then you go to, so much of Africa, and people can send each other money instantaneously through a cell phone, and that seems impossible in the United States. So is that something, kind of what you were working on, like helping to bring this sort of infrastructure to help people move money around easily with the resources that they had, i.e., cell phone towers and handheld cell phones?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's kind of like a leapfrog technology where like you just like jump ahead and can use like mobile phones to make these payments. Like one way I describe Wave to American audiences is it's like Venmo, but if no one had a bank account. So like how would you build Venmo if like no one had an easy way to transfer money into and out of the system? Or for like people in India, it's kind of like Paytm. Like the biggest place where it took off initially was in Kenya with a project called M-Pesa, which was launched in 2007. And they basically realized that like we don't need these huge bank branches that are really expensive and therefore lead to like high fees that most people can't afford. We can just create like people can just send money like sending a text. So if you have a mobile phone, even a dumb phone, you can basically like type the phone number of the person you want to send to and send money. And it just kind of took off. Like people who didn't have like there's like 400 million unbanked people in sub-Saharan Africa. And this meant that they could finally access like there's like basic financial resources that you and I might take for granted. So like one way to think about it is just imagine if you didn't have a bank account, like how much more difficult would your life be? And things that come up is like, okay, where are you going to put your savings? Like you end up storing them under the mattress, but then if someone finds out, like that becomes a big risk to you, so people just save less. If you want to buy something online, you just like probably can't do it because there's no way to pay for that upfront. Like you would have to pay cash on delivery, which then introduces risk for the suppliers. So yeah, I don't know. It was like Wave was such a good experience because it was working on this like very core piece of infrastructure that yeah, people really needed in Africa.
So what was your experience like as an employee that had to live kind of around the world? I mean, did you have
Mhm.
to go through the immigration process to live in Africa, and then did you move around from country to country? Like, kind of how was that experience for you?
No, I was mostly working in the UK, but like traveling to Africa frequently for short trips. And when I joined, Wave was very small. Like we only had, I think, like a handful of users. It was like just beginning. But the founders of Wave had already built like a big international money sending business, so they like knew what they were doing,
Hmm.
and they were like amazing entrepreneurs. I think still some of the best like entrepreneurs I have ever come across. Um, but I got to see Wave go from like all the like, oh, it was yeah, three engineers, and we basically like were working from the living room of a house in Dakar, and like the support team was in like one of the other bedrooms, basically with like makeshift soundproofing on the walls. And like no one trusted us. Like the Wave team would report going out into the market and just hearing like, oh, we don't trust you, like you're just scamming us, you're going to steal our
Hmm.
money, we'll never use this. And then like those exact people who were the most skeptical in year one, 2 years later, once Wave was like huge and had millions of users, like those people came back and were our biggest advocates,
Hmm.
uh, and like helped us get way more users.
That's amazing. Did you end up ever kind of talking to and interfacing with customers and like seeing the impact of what you guys were building?
Yeah, I did quite a lot of just like trips. Like obviously that wasn't my primary job. Like my primary job was writing the code,
Right.
and doing the engineering, but it was helpful to occasionally take trips to the field and just see like, okay, what's actually happening on the ground? How are people using our product? What kinds of issues are they running into? Um, and yeah, talking directly to users was helpful because then it helped me understand the feedback I was getting from PMs and support teams and things like that.
So, you're doing this really incredible work. I mean, I'm assuming it was a lot of fun. You were working remotely in the UK. You got to travel to Africa for work, which is, kind of unbelievable. At what point did you come to the US? Because I guess you came to the US through Wave, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you were working there already, and I guess they sponsored your L1 intracompany transfer. Is that right, to come to the US and work here?
Yeah, so Wave had offices in several different locations, so including the US and in the UK. So I was able to transfer from like the UK office to the New York office. Um,
How's that process? Because that now you don't have a huge university handling your student visa anymore. Now it's a little bit more complicated, perhaps. What do you remember about that process?
that was relatively straightforward the first time, but then Wave went through this like restructuring, so I had to like reapply for my L1 because they like some of the assets of the company got acquired, and it was like a big like yeah business thing. So I had to get a new visa stamp, and it was in the middle of COVID when most embassies were not taking visa appointments.
Mm,
So that was another moment where I had to be very resourceful, and I basically like wrote a script to like scrape the like US like wait times at different consulates basically, and figure out like which embassies were actually taking appointments, what were the wait times like, where could I go.
wow.
And so yeah, I don't know, there's like another small story of needing to figure out like how to get a visa stamp effectively.
And you did that purely for yourself. I mean, you wrote the script and sort of just
Yeah.
for your own information and knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's like another instance of just like, yeah, the US immigration system can feel quite difficult to navigate. Even right now, like figuring out what are the wait times at different embassies is
Right.
not as simple as you might think. So like luckily I had the coding skills to be able to like answer that question, but like not everyone does. And so yeah, it can be difficult.
I want to understand then. So you went through this process. You came here on an L1, and then you worked, for Wave in the US. At what point did you start to think to yourself? I mean, this is obviously a company that you were passionate about. the work that you're doing was impactful. It was tech work. It was helping people. I mean, it's checking all the boxes, I'm assuming, or many of them.
Mhm.
At what point were you starting to think, maybe there's something else out there for me, or maybe there's just something I can build that can, make the process that I went through easier? What was that moment, if you remember?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in like try to run towards things, not away from things. So it wasn't so much that I like was trying to leave Wave, but it was more
Right.
like I I had seen the very early days of Wave. Like, I had like dinner with the founders like every day that week, and got to ask them all these questions about like, why are you making certain decisions? Why are we doing distribution in these places? Like, why are we targeting fishermen instead of like tailors or some other like market? And I felt like I had just had the best view into like what does it take to make a startup successful, or like what does a successful startup look like on the inside, because it is quite counterintuitive. Like compared to like the time at university versus at Wave, like I had to unlearn so many lessons.
Hmm.
Like Wave was just all about like moving really quickly, like prioritizing incredibly heavily. Whereas like at university, it's like I described before, like you have your syllabus ahead of time, like you're not really making those in-game calls, like you're not changing your priorities week to week. And so just like, yeah, having that experience of working at like a really high performing early stage startup that had now grown. So after 4 years, Wave was like, I think 2000 plus employees. We had like 120 engineers. Like I was managing, or like I was the tech lead for an engineering team. Um,
Wow.
like it was kind of, I think by some metrics, had become or like had raised money at like a $1.7 billion valuation, like had become a successful company by some metrics, even though like Wave's ambitions are much, much bigger still. So I wish, yeah, Wave all the best in hitting those huge targets. But I kind of wanted to have that early stage experience again and try it for
Mhm.
myself and see like, can I actually apply the lessons that I think I have learned at Wave? And so then I wanted to like start my own thing. And I felt like immigration was a great focus area because of how important it is and how impactful it is. Um, so like at Wave, I had seen the benefits of working at a like mission driven company. Um, like Wave users, when we shipped new features that enabled them to like pay their electricity bill without having to go somewhere in person and physically hand over cash, like they loved that. Like it was just like we had like, yeah, I don't know. I wrote a LinkedIn post about this recently, but literally shopkeepers would paint the Wave logo on their shop themselves completely unprompted, or like fishermen would paint the Wave logo on their boat just to show support, or people
Wow.
would make like memes about Wave and just circulate them amongst their friends. And I just found that like people loved Wave so much and still do because it was solving this like really important, really challenging problem. And I feel like immigration is somewhat similar in that when someone who's moved to the US is already like incredibly ambitious, incredibly driven. They've already done something that probably most of their community in like back home hasn't done. And I just think that like, yeah, US immigration can be stressful. And if you can help people with that process and help it run smoothly, like people really appreciate that. So that was why I picked immigration.
I want to this is exactly the right point for me to take a quick pause,
Yeah.
just to say thank you to our second sponsor, who actually, so this company is called Journey, Joorney. So for those folks who don't know, Journey is one of the leading, if not the biggest provider of immigration business plans. So they partner with immigration lawyers and global mobility companies and firms, and they create, tailor-made business plans for folks who are immigrants coming to the U.S., on an EB2 NIW visa, EB1, EB5 investor visas, E2 investor visas, and so much more. They also work with folks from other countries all over the world coming into Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, et cetera, et cetera. And their specialty, I mean, they do a lot, but their specialty really is immigration business plans. So, effectively they help people kind of like you, who have this business idea and want to come to the US and explore it and expand on it, apply for those visas by helping them with the business plan, period. I've known the team for a number of years. They're awesome. They actually just had a really great summit all about business immigration that I got to speak at. So they also create a lot of good content for the industry, especially for immigration lawyers. So super grateful for them for sponsoring the show. So for folks who are interested, if you handle any of these visas and you need the best business plan for your immigration cases, check them out, JOORNEY.com, or check out the link in the show notes. So thank you to Journey. Now, Awais, you had this idea. You had your own immigration process as well. It sounds like it wasn't that bad, right? But you had this idea. Where does the O1 come into play? Because you're working at Wave, you are on an L1 visa, you have this idea to start a business, amazing. You want to do it in the immigration industry. How does the O1 come into play? Because that's what O1Pathways does. So, what was that process of like your own O1, which I really want to hear about, and then how that progressed into the business?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's mainly like I'm kind of a technologist or a software engineer or like an engineer basically. And I see the world a certain way. And the question I was just asking myself is like, can I be useful here? So like the answer might be no. Like it might be that we don't need more software engineers working on immigration. But I'm kind of like, my central point is just exploring that question of like, how can technology help in immigration? How can I, with my like software engineering skill set, contribute to this space? And my sense is like, having spoken to like lots of immigrants and like immigration lawyers at this point, it's like if you're a lawyer, then you're trained to see risks and spot risks. Whereas if you're a technologist, you're trained to see opportunities. And I think that like mindset shift, like if you can combine those two skill sets together, then I think there's like a huge opportunity within immigration just to like make the immigration experience go more smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your O1. How did that come about?
So I had to switch to an O1 to like start my own company basically. So it was just once I had decided that I want to be a founder, I like spoke to some immigration lawyers and learned that the O1 was an option for me. And yeah, part of the inspiration for O1Pathways is like initially I had read about the O1 and just assume that I didn't qualify because, you read the USCIS website, it says you have to be in the very top percent of like, who have risen to the top of your field, like that kind of language. Like they use the example of if you've won a Nobel Prize. And I think I definitely did this, and I think other people do. I just kind of put that to one side. I was like, okay, that's for like the John Olivers of the world or like the Usain Bolts who might want to come to the US or something, not for me. And so when I spoke to an immigration lawyer and he said, you can get the O1. And then I like had already done all the work I needed to. So it was just a case of gathering documentation. And then I think within 3 or 4 weeks, I want to say I had the O1. And at that moment I was like, oh, wow, like why isn't this talked about more? Or like, why don't more people know about the O1 as an option? And yeah, so the product I built now, O1Pathways, is basically a way for more people to conduct that eligibility assessment. So before you even speak to a lawyer, you can just input your information in. There's like an AI trained model in the background that like doesn't ask you, have you ever served a critical role at a company, or like use the language that many people just don't know, that the like highly technical USCIS language. It asks questions that people will know the answers to, and then uses AI to create like I would say like a rudimentary, like initial evaluation of, is this something to look more into or not?
Do you feel that it's also a matter of like self-belief? When people read that language, they just automatically don't believe that they, are in that top 1% or whatever. And so it's a matter of kind of how you present the O1 visa.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's hard for people to self-evaluate. Like I think to know if you qualify for the O1 could take like many dozens of hours of reading, because really you would need to study all the criteria, figure out like what are they referring to, figure out like what kinds of evidence count and don't count. So I think it's like whether you believe you're in the top 1% or not, like it doesn't make that much of a difference. It's more like, what have you done in your career and how can we so another way to think about it is like, what does a good immigration lawyer do? And this comes back to this like technologist's way of thinking. Like I think as a software person, as a tech person, you always go to first principles and you say like, okay, like in an immigration consultation, like what is the immigration lawyer doing to figure out if someone qualifies for the O1? And usually it's like they look at their profile and say, is this a researcher? Is this a software engineer? Is this a founder? Like, what are they? And then we'll ask questions that are relevant to that person to help them like present the best version of themselves or present the things that are relevant. And the tool I've built, it kind of asks the question of like, can AI do this? And I found in my early like experiments that like AI can do a reasonably good job of saying like, hey, you have this award in your background, which actually seems like it could be useful for the O1. Like, let's talk about that. Or like, hey, you've worked at this company that has a like distinguished reputation. So let's figure out what did you actually do at that company, and figure out like whether you could apply with the critical role criteria.
So who's the ideal user for O1Pathways? I mean, would it be, if I'm an individual and I want to know, I've heard about the O1, I may not know, to your point, what the technical language means, but hey, I have a master's degree, I've worked at, I've made some rocket boosters at Tesla, at SpaceX, whatever. And I want to know if I qualify. Is that the person that you think is, kind of the ideal user for O1Pathways?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, someone like that would be perfect, basically. And I think the advantage of it is that like so even the best immigration lawyer can only do a certain number of consultations a week, right? So you would need, and many like lawyers will charge consultation fees, which makes like a ton of sense. Like their time and expertise is really valuable. And so I think there are people out there who never find out if they should look into the O1 or like could qualify for the O1 because that barrier to entry is just a bit too high. Whereas in 15 minutes, they can go to this website, it's free to use, and like figure out, like it doesn't tell you like, hey, you definitely qualify for the O1. Like I don't
Of
think the
course, yeah.
software is anywhere near good enough, or like it's also like, yeah, should not be doing that. But I think it can, one, like teach you about the O1 and figure out whether it's something like worth exploring.
Right. It'll give you a likelihood. I guess the idea is that, well, if the software tells me that I'm a good candidate, that gives me a lot more of an incentive to reach out to a lawyer, to work with a law firm.
Yeah.
Is there? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and I've like lawyers really appreciate that as well. Like the
Right.
lawyers I've spoken to have said like they will often have consultations with people who like either like just don't qualify for the O1 and they end up needing to like explain a lot of things in the consultation, or like people who really do qualify, but then again the consultation is like going over that information. Whereas if you have done the O1Pathways assessment, then you're like presenting the lawyer with all of the most relevant information up front in a way that just like lets you skip that first 15 or 20 minutes of like going through all that stuff and jumping ahead to the like higher value stuff.
Now, given that my network and a lot of the people who view and watch the show are immigration lawyers and folks who work at law firms that who support O1 candidates, is there what's the relationship between O1Pathways and them? I mean, is there an opportunity for them to use it, to be partners? Like, how does that work for the actual legal industry?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the like lawyers should give it a go and like see what they think. The feedback I've gotten is that like it's more useful to applicants than it is to law firms.
Right.
That like if you're a lawyer, then you can probably conduct an eligibility assessment yourself like relatively quickly because you already have all that information preloaded. And so, yeah, I think like it's like much more useful to applicants. It's still relatively early, like people are using it, so I can kind of see like who are the types of people that are using it. I can see like how like what does the AI say about whether people qualify or not. But it's mostly aimed at like applicants directly right now.
And so after the assessment is done, what else are you working on from an O1Pathways perspective, from product perspective? Is there additional service? Is there kind of a follow-on thing? Can you help them with parts of the petition after they've received an assessment? Sort of what are you doing with the company, with the business?
Yeah, so like once I shipped or like launched the O1Pathways like eligibility checker, this was the main question I was paying attention to, is like what do people want to use it for? And I just had like a lot of people reach out to me and say like, oh great, I like found out that I'm eligible for the O1 or like could be eligible for the O1. Like, can you help me file it?
Mhm.
And so now I've been partnering with like a small number of lawyers, and they have been helping to like actually prepare the petitions. So the goal is to basically become like an O1 expert, like as a company that is like has partner lawyers working in the background to deliver like an amazing end-to-end O1 experience.
Yeah.
Because by the time someone has like completed the eligibility check, like we already know quite a lot about what their final petition will look like. Like they've already done like maybe 10 or 20% of the work that it would take them to like get to actually being able to file for an O1.
Fascinating. Do you see, I don't know, do you see expansion in the kind of immigration law firm space? Because I think, I mean, here's my thought, right? And we're just spitballing here. If
Yeah.
I'm a law firm and you said one of the challenges is law firms, they want to help people with O1s. Sure, they can do the assessment, of course, especially if the law firm and the lawyer specializes it and has a ton of experience. But this product would help them expedite that, at least the initial step, right? Let's not even get to the filing of it, but at least to the assessment. Could this be a tool that lawyers use to do more and more robust uh, consultations, and have, O1 Pathways provide them with that initial assessment. And that way, when the person's coming into the actual, interview, or not the interview, the consultation, there's already something on paper for them that gives them their chances. And so they could say, great, let's sign up. Or, as you probably know, there are some, lawyers and other people who will basically say, look, I don't believe you qualify based on my experience, but if you do these things over the next couple of months, years, etc., the likelihood will go up greatly. And so, a lot of lawyers can even help direct clients in that way. So,
Yeah.
do you see anything possible there where lawyers can use O1 Pathways to support what they're already doing and just be more efficient, talk to more
Yeah.
people,
I mean, I
etc.?
would say like, yeah, if there are any lawyers like listening to this and are interested in using O1 Pathways, just like reach out to me and we can talk about it. And like, yeah, I'm like really like interested in hearing like how immigration lawyers see this being useful to them or to their clients. Um, yeah, like as I said, like I think my core expertise is on the like software engineering, coding, like building
Yeah.
product side, and so I'm always like really happy when immigration lawyers can like chime in with that other piece, like with all their expertise about immigration.
So, given that you've built this, I mean, so you got your O1, right? Which is really exciting. You didn't use O1 Pathways for it, right?
No, I, did,
Um,
I wish I existed
yeah,
when
exactly, right. And that's how I feel about Laborless. When I was practicing immigration law and I did H-1Bs, I wish Laborless existed to help me, with all the LCAs and PAFs and all the compliance stuff I did. But that's why we're driven to build the thing that we wish we had. Do from what you can share, maybe what what's your vision of where you want to take the company? I mean, O1 Pathways as a brand is obviously very specific to the O1 visa, but I imagine if you build a very robust eligibility checker, can you use it for other visa types? Maybe similar ones that require a hefty amount of background information and have a complicated checklist, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, so the big vision for me is just like really deeply exploring this question of like how good can the software for immigration get, and like that could include lots of different things. So I like to use the kind of airline industry as a metaphor, maybe
Mhm.
like when you book a flight, you don't have to like go to every airline, figure out what their flight schedules are, figure out like, oh, interesting, like if I take this flight at 4 p.m., it lands at 7. There's another one at like 8:30, which gives me enough, like the software takes care of all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like in immigration, it is a bit like that pre-tech phase where you really do have to sit down and figure out like, oh, okay, if I do OPT now, then I have to do the H-1B lottery, but like maybe I should be doing something else. And then I'll be on this like green card trajectory. And I think people have to do a ton of manual work.
Yeah.
So I'm exploring like, yeah, how can software basically help with that? Um, and so even like very simple questions, right? Or questions that seem very simple, like how long will it take me to get a green card? I think people who are new to US immigration often have that question and they think it's like a 30-second answer where it's like either 2 years, 5 years, and then you speak to an immigration lawyer or someone who knows immigration, and they're like, okay, wait, let me tell you, like, let's sit down. First of all, like, where were you born? Like, where was your spouse born?
Right.
Like,
Right.
and so I think to applicants, especially people who are not like deeply embedded in the US immigration system, there is a bit of like shock where you're like, oh, wow, this is much more complicated than I realized. Or when they find out how much it costs, like I was quoted like, I think $16,000 for an EB2 application and like
Wow.
$24,000. And at that time I was like, wow, that seems incredibly expensive for like a visa application.
And just the legal fees, by the way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So the thing, yeah, I'm kind of exploring it. Like I wanted to start really narrow and just give myself like a very tiny scope to begin, which is why I started with the O1. But I'm kind of looking at adjacent areas like is it possible to have some kind of system that like can help you learn about the visa options available to you beyond just the O1? I think there are like lots of interesting areas to explore, basically. Yeah, right now I'm mostly focused on like preparing O1 petitions end to end. Like I think there's a ton of opportunity to just like make that really efficient. But yeah, I mean, I would love for I would love for all these tools to exist at some point. Like this is how long we think your green card will take. Like another one is like as things change, right? So you could have a consultation with an immigration lawyer last year, and they recommend like, hey, you should apply for the EB2 NIW. You have a great chance. And then 9 months later, at the second half of last year, it's basically impossible for you to get an NIW, even though like the law hasn't changed, nothing's changed, just like the adjudication standards have changed. And so I feel like, yeah, applicants in that situation might never learn that a visa pathway that was previously open to them is now closed, or like a visa pathway that was previously closed is now open. Whereas if you had software that was really good at this, you could imagine like being able to send notifications to people saying like, hey, you should probably proactively do something right now because things are changing underneath you, and like it's been so long since you had an immigration consultation that you otherwise won't learn this information.
Yeah, and then this way, hey, here's a tool to at least maybe check it out initially, and then if
Right.
it makes sense, you can move forward. Yeah, I love that. I think first of all, you're preaching to the choir in terms of starting out with a small scope and really perfecting it to the extent possible and kind of growing from there. I think I love that approach too. I think it's more fun. I think you become a specialist in the thing that you do, which builds confidence and competence. And then moving forward, you can expand where it makes sense. So I think that's really great. So for folks who want to check out O1Pathways, I guess the website is the letter O, the number 1, pathways.com, right? I mean, I think right now the website mentions eligibility, but you're sort of working with some folks on maybe other aspects of the O1 visa. So can we expect the website to reflect that at some point in time?
Yeah, we might make some announcements soon as well about what we've been doing.
You heard it here, folks. Some announcements coming soon.
But for now, it's like
cool.
a free eligibility checker, and yeah, anyone can use it. And yeah, and that was important to me. It's just like nice to make it as accessible as possible. So I'd say to people, like, even if you don't think you're eligible for the O1, like it doesn't hurt to try.
I feel like it would be an ego boost for me as, I'm an American citizen. So in theory, I mean, not in theory, I don't need obviously a visa, but O1 recipients, they put it on their LinkedIn profiles. I mean, it is a big deal to get the O1 visa.
Yeah.
And so I almost think it'd be fun to say like, hey, I'm just thinking out loud here. I would do like maybe a drinking game or something. All right, everybody, take your LinkedIn profile, upload it, and whoever gets an O1 has to take a beer. I don't know. You know what I mean? Just get people using it, just to get some ideas out of it. And it's cool because really what you're doing is you're taking legal language, you're mapping it to this interface, and then you're giving people a conclusion based on it. That's one of the hardest aspects of immigration law, right? And one of the most technical. Forms automations, compliance automation, et cetera. That's workflow. I mean, that's great. You're making people more efficient, but the hard stuff is the research-based, taking facts and applying them to the standards in the law and then coming up with something. So I think I think you have to focus on that almost obsessively. That cannot be an afterthought because it has to be reliable.
Yeah, and I think we're at this phase with like AI and everything that we don't really know what's possible. So I think this is a great like moment in history to really like think from first principles. Like another example I like to use is like Amazon Prime. Like that's like a technologist's way of thinking, where like when Amazon's like 2-day shipping for free was released, like no one thought it was possible. They were like, okay, like no other retailer had the idea to do this, because they were like, it's technically impossible. And I think in immigration, I think there's a lot of things like that where we just assume like, okay, it's not possible to like accurately tell someone whether they qualify for an O1 or not. But like with all these new AI tools, I think it means that there were a lot of things that were previously impossible that are now possible. And like I think the ones that get talked about most are like ChatGPT for petition prep or something. But I find those a lot less interesting. Like I don't think people want kind of AI generated petitions. I think they want like the highest quality possible petition. So I've been exploring AI for these like other use cases and trying to find like, yeah, like if it can figure out who would, like if it can help someone who assumed that they didn't qualify for an O1, like find out that they do in fact qualify and like stay in the US based on that grounds, like I think that's a great outcome.
That's life-changing for that person. Awesome, man. I'm really excited, and I, looking forward to the announcements to see how O1Pathways continues to grow. So again, thank you for being here, and for folks who are listening, check it out, O1Pathways.com. I think folks can find you on LinkedIn, right? So they can give you some feedback, share some thoughts, connect with you, talk about, maybe they want to try it for their firm, whatever it might be. So really appreciate you being here. And and I'll add the link to your book so that people can read it. By the way, how long is it? How many pages?
It's like 200 pages or maybe a bit less.
Dang. So, all right.
Yeah. But it's just like a collection of essays that I wrote about my experience in India and like the things I was learning.
That's awesome. Well, I'll add a link to that in the show notes as well. So Awais, thank you so much. This was really great. I learned a lot of things about you as well, and really excited to continue to watch you grow and the business grow, and just AI and immigration grow in a very thoughtful direction. So appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for being here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we'll play tennis soon as well. I'm looking forward
definitely. Can't wait. Okay. Awesome. What a great episode. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around and for listening to this story and for all the great questions. Wanted to say big thank you again to DocketWise as the main sponsor of the episode. So, again, as I mentioned before, DocketWise is an all-in-one immigration case management platforms. They do forms, customizable questionnaires in a ton of different languages for your immigration clients. They integrate with a lot of different tools, whether it's scheduling tools, email tools, banking, and invoicing tools for your law firm, labor list for your H-1B compliance, and so on. So check them out, www.docketwise.com. There's a link in the show notes. Look them up, look at their website, check out their resources, read their blogs. I mean, there's so much good stuff that they do to support the industry. And of course, thank you to them for supporting the show. Just a couple of comments here. So Marianne said the airline analogy is great. We need a kayak.com for immigration with several drop-down menus. So thank you, Marianne, as always, for tuning in and for listening. I'm so happy that you get to be part of this, and for your comments. And thank you for everybody else, for your comments and for being here. I'm excited to be back with more episodes. So next week, please join me for another episode of the GMI Rocket Show. But in the meantime, have an awesome weekend and be safe, everybody. Peace out.